Hey everybody, John Mark here. Welcome to Mark My Words. Well, folks, America is starting to boil. We have Michigan lawmakers, state lawmakers, wearing bulletproof vests to work. Now, if I would have told you, say, this time last year that we would see that in 2020, what would you have said? In this video, I want to talk about why America is reaching the boiling point. Some of this you're going to be aware of, but I think it's important to kind of put it all in one place so we can understand the dynamic of what's happening. I want to talk about this new dynamic where grassroots right-wingers are protesting in a new way. They're protesting heavily armed in places where it's legal to do so. I want to talk about the dynamic of the clash between the left and the right that this is turning into. And I want to talk about why I actually prefer this fast boil situation to the slow boil situation we had before. I definitely don't prefer the aspect where I have friends and people that I know, and probably all of us know people or ourselves are experiencing not having income. But from the perspective of what needs to be done in America, I actually prefer the fast boil to the slow boil. This is bringing a lot of stuff to the surface. It's opening up the wounds. It's exposing more and more of the problems with our leadership, with the problems with our system. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So first, let's just cover a little bit of the news. I'm not going to belabor this. I don't want to repeat everything you guys are seeing on the news. That's not the main point of this video. But just to recap, this is being recorded on Friday evening, May 1st. We had protests in Michigan within the last couple of days. Heavily armed protests. Michigan politicians wear bulletproof vests as armed protesters storm the Capitol to protest stay-at-home orders. And it turns out Michigan decided not to extend their lockdowns. So some might say this type of protest was actually effective. I don't know what's going through the minds of the legislators in Michigan, but if you're wearing a bulletproof vest to work, maybe it crosses your mind that the people who are wanting to shoot you might actually shoot you if you don't give in to their demands at least somewhat. So, and I pointed this out in Richmond back when that happened, the protest in Richmond. Some people were saying, oh, it's a nothing burger, the lawmakers don't care. But what I pointed out was, listen, this is an escalation. And I said, can you remember within the last several decades any kind of a right-wing demonstration? I think they have some pictures here. Any kind of a right-wing demonstration. Oh, they don't on this article. That featured such a huge number. I mean, there were thousands at that demonstration of heavily armed people. Then we saw them doing it in Kentucky. Now Michigan. And it is an escalation, folks. It is an escalation. And think about this, too. What other nation in the world is this even possible? Do you think the Chinese lawmakers are going to be wearing bulletproof vests anytime soon? I mean, maybe. But most of these other places are disarmed. Okay, but America has a Second Amendment. So this is an escalation. This is a continuation of that escalation. And when I said that back when Richmond happened, I said, you're going to see this continue to happen because it's sending a message. And the message at the core of it, even if they don't say it out loud, even if the protesters don't actually say it, the message is the grassroots right wing has 400 million guns and 8 trillion bullets, and 2/3 of the military voted Trump. So basically the grassroots right-wingers. And the left and the elites have no enforcement arm that they can really count on. At least not to fight directly against the grassroots right, because most of the military is the grassroots right. I mean, the cops, sure, but they're staffed for bare minimum crime suppression. So, big development here as far as I'm concerned. I think this is just further escalation, and it's a very, very important development. We've also seen demonstrations in California, and I don't even have the latest news on all of this. Some of this is moving so fast it might be slightly outdated by the time you listen to it, but that's okay. There were supposed to be demonstrations in Raleigh today. I haven't seen much news about that, but demonstrations in other places. I saw an instance where, and I apologize, I don't have all this pulled up. I'm trying to do this video on kind of short notice. I was planning on doing a different video, but there's so much happening. I felt like I needed to make one on this, and I've been a little bit limited on time lately because of my work. And that's a good problem to have. A lot of people are out of work. But there was a police officer that tried to tell some people at a park that they had to leave, and they shoved him in the pond or in the lake that was at the park. That's the first instance that I've seen of actual physical escalation, let's put it that way, against someone trying to enforce these Orwellian measures. Some sheriffs in the blue states are saying, we're refusing to enforce these things. We had protesters in Idaho a few days ago. I made a video about it. They showed up at a police officer's house after he arrested a mom at a park right in front of her kids. I made this video about it here. Okay, so a lot of developments going on, and it's shaping up by partisan lines as usual. So America is boiling. Now, I also want to do a quick review of the science. I did it in this video right here. Trump pauses immigration, game-changing new data. There's game-changing new data on immigration sentiments in America. Huge shift towards anti-immigration sentiment. That's very, very good from our perspective as a grassroots right wing, because non-white immigrants vote more than 2-to-1 left wing. That immigration needs to stop, because if it continues, that's political suicide for the grassroots right wing. Not even just in the current system, of course, but for any attempt to govern lands that keep importing people that vote 2-to-1 left wing, it's obviously crazy. It's impossible unless you kick them all out or do something like we as the Propertarians are suggesting, which I'm going to talk about in a second, because this is the perfect time, folks. What we're seeing here, this is the perfect time to push the separation message that I've been preaching, that many of us have been preaching, that we need to separate. We need to make the big blue cities into independent city-states. This is the perfect time to push that narrative, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But there's a lot of game-changing new data as far as this bug itself. And I'm going to use the word bug because if I talk about the actual name of the thing, YouTube says I can't monetize a video, which is ridiculous because the big media companies are talking about it all day long and making billions from advertising. So anyways, let's do a quick review of the science. I don't want to repeat everything I said in this. I went into it in detail here, but I think it's important in case anybody is not aware out there. We have new data from a Stanford study, and these are like mainstream sources. These are not conspiracy theorists sitting in their basement eating Cheetos. Stanford study, University of Southern California, Los Angeles County study. There are other places we're now getting a good amount of data that when they do testing on people that don't have symptoms, that are in an area where this bug has hit, they find that 50 to 60% of the people that get this bug never even know it. They show no symptoms whatsoever, which means that the death rate, if you do the math on these, and they have, the death rate is in the tenths of a percent, not like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6% like they've been saying. And of that tenth, whatever it is, 0.1% or 0.5%, it's hard to nail down exactly, but it's somewhere in that range. Of that tenths of a percent, 90% of those people who died from this thing had pre-existing conditions. So the threat of actual death from this thing for anybody that's healthy is extremely low. It's on the level of like a regular flu. So you combine those two data points, and as I said in this previous video, the grassroots right wing, 6 days ago when I put this video up, I said it's starting to form a consensus. Now I think there's a pretty solid consensus on the grassroots right wing that this whole total shutdown thing is unnecessary. We have a very specific group of people that are at higher risk that we can identify. If you have a pre-existing condition, absolutely social distance. We can be careful with you. I mean, I'd be fine with every grocery store leaving their first hour that they're open during the day for people like that, or whatever the case may be. I'm completely fine with that. But this whole total shutdown where we've got 30 million people unemployed now, You can't just keep doing this. So this is forming a consensus on the grassroots right wing. We've also seen things. We're seeing things now like Sweden is not a disaster. And, Trump tweeted, oh, Sweden shouldn't have done that. They made a mistake. Trump is, I'm not going to comment on Trump on this thing. I mean, a lot of people love Trump for a lot of reasons. I love him in certain ways. Other times he makes me want to rip my hair out. And this is one of those times. So now I'm glad he closed the borders in terms of immigration, at least temporarily. Of course, there were loopholes in that. But in any case, if you're waiting for your leadership to save you, folks, including Trump, you're going to be waiting forever. I'm talking about the current leadership, just so you know. Okay? So let's get into the dynamic that's happening now is now that we have this consensus on the grassroots right wing, we've got this clash. Once again, it's the grassroots right wing against the elites and the big corporations and the left. It shapes up this way once again. Because, for one thing, the government can't come out and say, sorry guys, we were wrong, we made a big mistake. Even if they're really honest about it and said, you know what, we just didn't have this data because we weren't doing testing on all these larger groups of people. So we thought the death rate was much higher. Even if they come out and try to be honest about it, I mean, I think that would be great, but are they going to do that? I'm not holding my breath. Not even Trump, whoever. And I think Trump is relatively a white hat on this thing. He's trying to get the economy back open, but it's like, man, just quote the new data. Even if you're not 100% certain on it, you got to at least get it out there. But the grassroots right wing is doing that job on its own. That's one thing that we're seeing as well, which is the grassroots right wing doesn't really need their own government leaders to deliver them the truth. The left relies on these sources of authority, not Trump obviously because they hate Trump, but they rely on the media. They trust the media much more. They trust government officials much more. We see this in the data. So we got this clash shaping up. The government isn't going to say we were wrong. We are seeing some of the right-wing governors open things up more, and what we're going to see there is that there's not going to be a disaster, just like in Sweden. Sure, you might see an increase in some cases, which would be expected, but it's not going to be anything close to the disaster that everybody was claiming was going to happen if you didn't close everything down. So, again, the grassroots right wing is going to be shown to be correct. The leftist governors and politicians don't want the economy to recover before the election. They love power. Even a lot of these Republican governors love power. Another big problem, which is a system problem that we have that needs to be fixed, which propertarianism knows how to fix, which is that even these Republican politicians, many of them are owned, for all intents and purposes, by the big globalist businesses, and just by big business in general, because they have a lot of money to give to these guys' campaigns. So these big businesses know every single day that this lockdown continues, their small business competition dies. So do you think they're in a big hurry to get back to normal on this? I mean, they probably don't want it to go on forever, but they know every single day this goes by, their competition is dying off. And so the grassroots right wing has anger building and building and building, and we're seeing that with protests. And obviously, most of the people that are protesting, even in these blue states, are right-wingers. So this is great. This is why we can push this separation narrative. Basically, the situation we have in America, folks, is our state lines were drawn a long time ago, and they're no longer relevant. Basically, what we have, if you look at this map, this is a 3D map of the 2016 election. And I know some of you have seen this before from me, but it's very, very important. This needs to be branded in your brain, and share this video with others who haven't heard it before. What you see here is the higher one of these lines is, the more population there is in that particular area, in that county. So what you see is the great majority of leftists actually live in a handful of huge blue cities, crammed in like sardines. Not only is that relevant when it comes to fourth generation warfare type situations, extremely relevant, and the world's leading fourth generation expert just said that same thing. But if you look at this, why don't you just, if you're just going to set this up in a practically workable way, why don't we just make those areas their own independent city-states and everybody else can do whatever we want? Why should these tiny geographical areas with huge population, and it's a huge number of foreign imports in these places as well, that's driving this largely, and the white people that do live there are also much more liberal leftist. Why don't we just make them independent city-states? Why should they have any say over the rest of us? Why should there be this big battle between the red areas that you see here and the blue areas? Basically, the urban areas are blue, and every leftist state is the same thing. It's driven by a big urban, one or two big urban blue areas, the actual city itself, and then the suburbs are split or somewhat majority red, and the counties the rural areas are red. So our state lines are no longer relevant. Each one of our states is the size of a European country. First of all, America is huge. It's ridiculous. Can you imagine trying to take Europe and make them all live under the same exact set of rules? The European Union is trying, and they're failing miserably, obviously, because they're trying to fight against reality. People are different from each other. This is one of the biggest lessons that we need to learn, folks. People are very, very different from each other. Forget about persuasion as a primary strategy. Forget about saying, yeah, we're going to be able to convince all these people that live in these blue areas. No, you're not. You're either going to separate from them or it's going to be war. That's what's going to happen. Because when Texas goes purple, it's going purple, and when it goes blue because of immigration, if something doesn't happen first, that's it. The system is over, and it's either going to be separation or war. So the practical solution here is to separate by basically county lines, or if you look at the Propertarian Constitution, or what I call the strengthened American Constitution, it has a very common sense but very clever way of allowing people to form their own local polities where there's much lower power distance, and where they have much more control over their lives, and where there's not this constant big battle between the blue areas and the red areas. And yes, you could have immigration restrictions. You can't come from a blue area into a red area after a certain period of time. Maybe to give, if there's any red folks in the blue area that want to leave, give them a few months to do that. After that, nobody can immigrate, or if they do, they can't vote for 100 years, and their children can't vote. So that the left can't do this thing where they ruin one area and then go to another area and ruin that. Like we see from California to Arizona here, for example, or Texas. They're contributing to that too, along with immigration. So that's the common sense narrative, and this is a great time to drive that narrative. Why? Because you have this huge conflict between the red areas of these blue states, like Michigan is a classic example, between the red areas of the blue states and the urban areas of the blue states. And we're seeing this conflict play out where, these leftist politicians, and I'm not saying this woman right here is a leftist politician, she probably is, but these leftist politicians want to do all this stuff for whatever their reasons are. They don't want Trump to look good in November. They like power, whatever. And then the grassroots right-wingers are just enraged. What do you mean we can't go back to work? What do you mean? It'd be one thing if this bug was killing 50% of everybody, but it's not. The data doesn't even support that remotely anymore. Stop lying. Right? So the red people, and I say the red people, it's the conservatives, the right-wingers, are livid, as they should be. Let's drive this separation narrative. We need to separate the red areas from the blue areas. These state lines that we have don't make any more sense. Not anymore. You say, well, the federal government's not just going to let that happen because they'd lose a lot of power. Yeah, well, too bad. Because 2/3 of the military voted Trump. Whatever the grassroots right wing gets in their head to do, it can do. Who's going to stop them? The left wingers, grassroots that don't believe in guns? And a few of them are like scrambling to buy a gun when this bug thing happened, and they're like, wait a minute, I can't just go into a store and buy a gun. No, you can't, moron. It'd be great if you could, but no, you can't. Are you really afraid of these people? These people have no enforcement arm to speak of. If the grassroots right wing wants to separate, who's going to stop them? What army are they going to send to fight against Trump supporters when 2/3 of the military is Trump supporters? And I know I make a lot of these same points in every video, but you got to remember there's hundreds, if not thousands, of new people every new video that I put out. So this is the perfect time to drive that narrative. The other thing that's happening is the left-wingers have no other way to virtue signal anymore. I mentioned this in my last video, but it's important to point out here because that's another thing that's driving this left versus right-wing conflict in America right now is the left-wingers can't virtue signal about how great non-white people are. It's much harder to do that now because everybody knows that the Chinese are crappy, all these low-trust cultures are crappy, there's consequences to interacting with them and relying on them. So that virtue signaling economy is dead. So the only virtue signaling they have left is, oh, I care about you so much, wear a mask. Well, the Surgeon General of the United States just came out and said wearing masks is not even helpful. But you see these big companies still virtue signaling because, see, virtue signaling is so cheap. That's why people do it. Companies virtue signal. Oh, we love diversity. Wear a mask. Just virtue signal, virtue signal, virtue signal. Show how good of a person you are. Costco is now requiring everybody to wear face masks. And Costco is generally a pretty good company from what I'm aware. But they're just virtue signaling because they're afraid of the Karens of the world. And if you don't know what I mean by a Karen, it's a relatively new term meant to, from what I can tell, describe a nagging woman who wants to scold everybody for not virtue signaling enough. And so these companies are afraid of the Karens, and they also are Karens. They just want to virtue signal, and virtue signal, and virtue signal. And what they're learning is the grassroots right wing doesn't care about their virtue signaling. And this is great. They need to learn that their virtue signaling means nothing. The only thing that matters to us is the truth. So these companies are catering to the lowest common denominator, the dumbest common denominator. The dumbest people that are out there that are the least informed think, oh, you got to wear a mask. Everybody better wear a mask. If they don't, oh my God. And if they don't do that, you're like, what if one of these Karens works at their company and then decides to sue? See? So you say, well, how do you fix something like this? This is why I'm so excited about propertarianism, folks. Propertarian law, I'm not going to go into the details here, but propertarian law is the only fix for this kind of stuff. The only fix for this kind of stuff is to make it so that public figures who lie can be prosecuted publicly, see? So if you're going around and you're saying, if you're a CEO of a company or an HR director at a company and you say everybody needs to wear a mask, you are personally liable if you're going against, for example, what the Surgeon General of the United States is saying, or if what you're saying is not actually backed up. If you're expressing absolute certainty that this is an absolute medical necessity, an absolute health necessity, and it's not, and it's imposing a cost on somebody in some way. Now, the mask thing may not be the best example because is it really that much of a cost to wear a mask? Well, maybe. But you get the point. We have so much medium now that is completely ignoring this new data. They're just ignoring it. Now, interestingly, there's some centrist and left-wing, even left-wing media sources that are talking about these studies in this new data. Some of them are trying to debunk it, not very successfully. But if you've got media that's out there hyping this thing like, oh my gosh, higher death rates than we thought before. And I didn't even mention this part. I mean, most of you are aware of it, but they're drastically increasing the death rates from this bug because they're reporting all sorts of other deaths that aren't caused by it or aren't primarily caused by it as deaths from this bug. Everybody knows this is happening. They admitted it straight out from the White House podium This Burke's scarf lady said that the other day. There's financial reasons for it. There's doctors saying we're being pressured to put this bug as cause of death. There's a lot of stories coming out now of people saying, my grandma did not die of this. She died of Alzheimer's. She never had this, and they put this on her death certificate. There's funeral home directors that I just read in New York saying that every single dead person that's coming through is being marked as this, and they're just like, there's no way every single one of these people died of this. So Propertarian law makes public figures personally liable if they lie to the public. And it's not just willy-nilly somebody deciding what a lie is or not, or what a lie isn't. It's a codified set of rules. It basically codifies what courtrooms already do and what courtrooms have done for centuries in the West to try to figure out what's a lie and what's the truth. That's basically the foundation of civilization, if you think about it. If you don't have courtrooms, if you don't have some kind of organized justice system that has some decent attempt and ability to get at the truth, you have no civilization. So Propertarian law codifies that, what courtrooms do to get at the truth, into a checklist of, I would just call them scientific falsehood tests, and public figures just have to make sure that what they say passes those falsehood tests. One of those falsehood tests, to put it a little bit oversimplistically, is lying by omission. Are you lying by omission? All these public figures who are out there touting certain death rates for this bug without telling you about these other studies from reputable, reliable sources that say that the death rate is actually several orders of magnitude less than that, they are liars. Under Propertarian law, they would be liable, especially if they're then proposing some kind of imposition of a cost on someone or millions of us based on those lies. Propertarian law nips that all in the bud. I'll put the link in the top comment of this video to a video that I made called How to Crush the Left Once and for All. And it goes through the basic Propertarian system changes, not all of it in detail, but that will give you the basic idea. This is why I'm so excited about this, because these are the types of problems that nobody else knows how to solve, folks. Bad information, blatant lying, fake news. How do you fix it? There's only one fix for fake news, folks, and it's Propertarian law. We have the solutions. So, in conclusion, we have this dynamic of the left pushing fear and control, and the left is much more willing to submit to these control measures based on bad data. And the right wing that is much more tuned into the truth on this now, and is obviously very, very wary of the abuses of power with this, and have a much greater desire for freedom and to get back to work. So this is a great, let's make lemonade out of lemons here, folks. Push this narrative. It's time to separate. By the way, I see this picture of Elon Musk here. I love Elon Musk, what he's been, bizarre tweets. Why? Because he's saying we need to get back to work because the data doesn't support this Orwellian stuff that they're trying to do. Let's push the separation narrative. This is the common sense solution. And also feel free to tell people, listen, if we don't do this, there's going to be a war. And you better think about who has the better chance of winning in that war. Watch my video, Civil War II in America, who would win. It's not rocket science to figure out who would win, folks. The people with the vast majority of the guns and the great majority of the military on their side would win. Spoiler alert. So let's drive this narrative of separation. This is our first offer in a sense. Like, okay, we need to separate, folks. This is the easiest solution. We also have a lot of other great things that will make everyone happier that we can do, which, for example, fixing the money system so that bankers aren't bringing money into existence and lending it out for homes and charging interest on it. But instead, the Treasury's doing that so nobody has to pay interest on their mortgage, because there's no reason for anybody to be paying interest on their mortgage. It's just parasitism. Or on their car loan, for example. So we have the solutions. We can push this narrative, and that's the first offer. Here's a bunch of stuff that's going to make everybody happier, and we're going to separate, which is going to make everybody happier. Let's do this. If you resist it, well, everybody knows what the next step is. Let's not pretend we don't. And like I said at the beginning, personally, I like this hot boil situation better than the cold boil situation. Now, I don't like it because I don't like people being out of work and being personally stressed. I hate that part of it. That does not make me happy. But honestly, my biggest fear before was we've got this slow boil situation where our enemies, the elites and the left, are just slowly boiling the frog. And I knew it was going to reach a head at some point because eventually Texas would turn blue, and that would be a wake-up call for many right-wingers. And of course, a lot of right-wingers are waking up as we go along anyway to the fact that demographics is destiny. And I'm not talking about every single individual here. I'm talking about group majority patterns. But you all know what I mean. But my greatest fear was it's just going to happen so slowly that there's never going to be, it's not like we would have to be afraid that there would never be a trigger point, because the people who understand what's going on could always create a trigger point. But it was like the biggest challenge is just to get people off their rear ends, even mentally and emotionally. But a couple of things that have really done that for us is that the left can't help themselves but to attack the Second Amendment, like they did in Virginia, which sparked that escalation of a heavily, heavily armed protest. And then now with this bug situation, these leftist governors can't help themselves, for reasons we all understand, from just being the embodiment of an Orwellian nightmare. And so it is sparking conflict, and we can turn this to our advantage. Spread that separation narrative everywhere you go. Make sure you watch the videos that I'm going to link to in the top comment of this video if you've not already. Very, very important stuff. Got some exciting things coming. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel. Love you all. Till next time.